Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be learning about for loops in Java. Now, before you watch this video, I recommend you watch my previous video on while loops and do while loops. There, I explained why exactly we need loops and how loops work. All loops have the same basic construct. Our for loop is also just a rearrangement of our while loop. Without understanding how while loops work, understanding for loops will be a bit difficult. Now, although you might have used while loops till now, for loops are very important. In fact, most often you're going to use a for loop over a while loop. And in this video, you're going to understand exactly why. Now, before we look at an example program or the example syntax for a for loop, let's try to understand how a for loop even works. To understand that, let's look at this simplified diagram of a for loop. This is the simplified version of the syntax of a for loop. A for loop is going to be using the for keyword. That's going to tell Java that I'm using a for loop and not another loop like a while loop or a do while loop. And then we're going to have brackets and parentheses, just like before. Like in a while loop, the parentheses are going to contain the body of the loop and the brackets is going to contain the condition. But here in the brackets of a for loop, you don't have just a condition, you also have the initialization of the iterator and the update. Now if you look at this simple framework or syntax of a while loop, you notice that we have the condition in the round brackets, we have an update in the body of the loop, and we're also initializing the iterator before we even use the loop. The iterator and the update is going to help us control the loop for a specific number of times. The only difference when we're using a for loop is that the initialization of the iterator and the update are also contained in the round brackets. All three, the initialization of the iterator, the condition, and the update are part of the first statement of the loop. This first statement of the loop is called the loop header. Now we'll try to understand the order in which a for loop gets executed. Now like before, we always start with the initialization of the iterator. We're going to initialize the iterator first. So our iterator could be a variable like I or B or anything else, and we often set this to an initial value like 0 or 1. After we initialize the iterator, we're going to move on to our condition. In any loop, we're only going to execute the body of the loop if the condition is true. Here, we're doing the same thing. We're only going to execute this body of the loop if this condition is true. Here, if this condition is true, we're going to move on to the body of the loop. After we execute the body of the loop, we're going to move on to the update. We're going to change the iterator. Remember, the update is what makes sure that we don't have an infinite loop and that our loop only continues for a specific number of times. By controlling the condition, the update, and the initial value of the iterator, I can control the exact number of times I want my loop to execute. After I update my iterator, I'm going to move back to the condition. Remember, we only keep executing the body of the loop as long as the condition is true. We'll need to keep checking the condition to see if it's true or false. Here, if the condition is true, we'll again move to the body of the loop. You notice we're not going to the initialization part again. The initialization is only going to give our iterator the initial value. If you move back to the initialization part, it's just going to keep resetting the iterator. There's no point of updating the iterator if you keep initializing it to the same value. Initialization only happens once. Now, after we evaluate the condition and we see that the condition is true, we're going to execute this body of the loop. Remember, the body of the loop can have any code. It can be something that could take an input from the user, it could print something, it could evaluate a value, or it could even print the value of I. After we execute this body of the loop, we're again going to move back to the update. We're going to change the value of the iterator and we're going to check the condition again. Let's say that now the condition is false. If a condition is false, we don't keep executing the loop. We're going to stop the execution of the loop. We're going to skip this body of the loop and we're going to move on to the rest of the program. Now, one important thing about for loops is that like the while loop, for loops are also entry control loop. If you look at the order in which we execute a for loop, you're always going to check the condition first. Only if the condition is true, you're going to move on to the body of the loop. Our condition is controlling our entry into the loop. If the condition is initially false, we're never going to execute the body of the loop. This is important to remember. Both for loops and while loops are entry control loops, but a do while loop is an exit control loop. Now, let's actually give some values to the different parts of this loop and let's try to execute this. Let's add this purple box as our output window. Remember, we're always going to start with the initialization. We're going to need to initialize the value of the iterator. Here, I made an orange box to just track the value of I as we keep executing this loop. So first, we're going to start with I is equal to 0. We're going to give it the initial value 0. After this, we're going to move on to the condition. We're going to check the condition. Here, we're checking if I is less than or equal to 3. Basically, we're checking if 0 is less than or equal to 3. 0 is not equal to 3, but it is less than 3. So this condition is true. Since the condition is true, we're going to move on to the body of the loop. Now, the body of the loop is just the println statement that's printing the value of I. I is currently 0, so we're just going to print 0. We're going to see a 0 in our output window. Then, from the body of the loop, we're going to move to the update. The update is just changing the value of I. Here, I have I++. So I++ or I is equal to I plus 1, they're the same thing. I'm using an increment operator over here so that it's a bit shorter. I++ is just going to increase the value of I by 1. Here, I is going to increase from 0 to 1. After we increment the iterator, we're again going to move on to the condition. Now our condition is again checking if I is less than or equal to 3. But the value of I has changed. I is now 1. So now we're checking if 1 is less than or equal to 3. 1 is less than 3. So this condition is going to be true. Since the condition is true, we're going to move on to the body of the loop again. Remember, we're not going to go to initialization again. So once we enter the body of the loop, we just have a println statement that's printing I again. The value of I is 1. So on our output window, we're just going to see the number 1. Then we'll again move to the update. The update is again going to increase I. Now it's going to increase I to 2. We're going to go back to the condition. The condition is checking if I is less than or equal to 3. But now since I is 2, we're checking if 2 is less than or equal to 3. This condition is true again. 2 is less than 3. So we're again going to move on to the body of the loop. We're going to go to the println statement. The println statement is going to print the number 2 since the value of I is now 2. From our println statement, we're again going to move back to our update. The update is going to increase I by 1. It's going to increase it from 2 to 3. We're going to go back to the condition, and in our condition, we're checking if I is less than or equal to 3. Basically, we're checking if 3 is less than or equal to 3. 3 is not less than 3, but it is equal to 3. So the condition is still true. From the condition, we're going to again move back to the println statement. We're going to print the value of I, which is 3, and you're going to see 3 on your output window as well. From the println statement, we'll again move back to the update. We'll increase the value of I by 1, so we're going to increase it to 4, and we'll move back to the condition. Now the condition is going to check if 4 is less than or equal to 3. This condition is finally false. 4 is not less than 3, and it's definitely not equal to 3. Since the condition is false, we're not going to keep executing this loop. We're going to skip this body of the loop, and we're going to move on to the rest of the program. The execution of the loop ends since the condition is now false. Let's say that after the loop, add a println statement that basically prints the value of I again. If you look at the orange box, which we've used to track the value of I, we see that the final value of I is 4. So this println statement, after the for loop, is going to print 4. You're finally going to see a 4 on your output window. I'd also like you to compare the order of a while loop with the order of a for loop. You notice that it's exactly the same. The only thing that's changing is the syntax and how you're arranging the terms. If you look at a while loop, you're going to initialize the iterator first, you're going to check the condition. If the condition is true, you'll move on to the body of the loop, and then you're going to update the iterator, you're going to move back to the condition, and you're going to keep repeating this. If you look at a for loop, it's exactly the same. You're initializing the iterator first, you're going to move to the condition. If the condition is true, you're going to move to the body of the loop. After you execute the body of the loop, you're going to move to the update. After that, you're going to move back to the condition, and if the condition is still true, you're going to move to the body of the loop again, and you're going to keep repeating this until the condition becomes false. There are a couple of important things I wanted to point out with for loops. The first thing is the syntax of a for loop. If you notice, all the different terms of a for loop, the initialization of the iterator, the condition, or the update, all three of them are separated by semicolons, not commas, semicolons. If I put a comma over here, it's going to cause a syntax error. I have to use a semicolon. The next important thing is the iterator. Now, whenever you declare the iterator in the loop header, this makes the iterator local to this for loop. This means that if I try to access the iterator outside this for loop, it's again going to cause an error. So over here, if I add a println statement and I basically print the iterator I, you're going to notice that it's going to cause an error. If I look at this error, it's going to say that I cannot be resolved to a variable. Now this happens because if I declare this variable I and initialize it in my loop header, Java is going to restrict this iterator I to this loop only. So whenever I'm trying to access the iterator outside this for loop, it's not going to find that variable. Now inside the for loop, I can access the iterator. That's why when I'm using the same println statement inside the for loop, it's not causing any error. Because this iterator is local to just this for loop, if I make another for loop, I can use the same iterator. Both of them will be independent from each other. The values of this iterator is not going to affect this iterator, because this iterator is local to this for loop and this iterator I is local to this for loop. They are going to be completely different or independent variables. But let's say you do want to access the iterator I after you execute the for loop. If you want to do that, you can just declare this variable I outside the loop, and we'll remove this int over here because you can only declare the variable once. When I do this, I'm declaring the variable over here, but I'm initializing it and assigning it a value inside my for loop. Since I'm declaring my variable outside my for loop, now this variable is common to this whole main method and this loops class as well. So now when I use the same println statement to access the variable I, it's not going to cause any errors. This variable I is now not just restricted to this for loop. I can access it wherever I want in this main method. But now you notice that if I make another for loop and I again declare and initialize a variable or an iterator called I, it's now going to cause an error and it's going to say that this is a duplicate local variable I. Basically, Java is telling me that you already made a variable I and you're declaring it one more time. The first thing you need to know about variables is you can't use the same variable name for multiple variables. So this is going to be an error. That's why, unless you really need to access the variable outside your for loop, it's always best to just declare the iterator inside the for loop itself. If I do that, I can use the same variable name I for multiple for loops. It makes things a bit simpler. Next, we're going to see what happens if we add a semicolon after this loop header. Now there is an error with this println statement. I'll explain that later. So let's just remove this println statement first. Now what happens when I add a semicolon is that Java is going to automatically create these parentheses before this semicolon. Basically, it's going to create an empty loop or a null loop. It's going to execute the loop just like you did before. But now, since you have a semicolon over here, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to keep moving back and forth. Now, if I add the same println statement like before, it's again going to give me the original error. I cannot be resolved to a variable. Over here, since I'm declaring I in the loop header, this means that my variable I is local to the loop. This statement is not part of the loop. Even though we have parentheses, because of this semicolon, Java is actually going to create parentheses that look like this after the loop. So the body of the loop is just going to be this. This is not the body of the loop. That's why when I'm trying to access the variable I, I'm basically accessing it outside the loop. As you've seen before, if the variable I is declared in the loop header, I can't access it outside the loop. And that's why I'm getting this error. So you have to be careful when you're using semicolons. Make sure you never use the semicolon after your loop header. Now let's look at this weird case. So over here, I declare this variable I outside my for loop so that I can make this variable common to the entire main method instead of restricting it to just this for loop. But in this case as well, I added a semicolon after my loop header. Like I just told you, because of this semicolon, Java is going to automatically add these parentheses, meaning it's going to make this loop an empty loop. It's going to execute like any normal loop, but this is going to be considered the body of the loop. This will not be considered the body of the loop. Here, if you manually execute the loop, you'll notice that you're going to start at I is equal to 0. You're going to check the condition. If 0 is less than 3, since the condition is true, you're going to move to the body of the loop, which is this empty loop over here. You're going to move to the update and you're going to increase I by 1. I is now going to be 1. You're again going to move to the condition 1 is less than 3. Again, you're going to move to the empty body of the loop and you're going to keep moving this way until loop execution ends. By the time the loop ends, the value of I changes, but you're not going to do anything. All because of this semicolon over here. Now, when I is equal to 3, we know that the condition is going to be false and the loop execution is going to end. The final value of I is going to be 3. After the loop execution ends, the next statement Java is going to immediately execute is this println statement, which is printing the value of I. Remember, the final value of I is 3. So this is just going to print the number 3. When I run this program, I am going to get 3 as my output. The only thing you need to remember is when you add a semicolon, this won't be considered the body of your loop anymore. Java is going to automatically add empty brackets and is going to consider that as the body of the loop. Now I just made a small change in my loop. I changed the update. I'm basically decreasing the value of I by 1. The condition is still the same. It's still checking if I is less than 3. We'll try to evaluate and predict the output of this loop. So initially I is 1. We're checking if 1 is less than 3, which is obviously going to be true. And we're going to enter the body of the loop and we're going to print the value of I. We're going to print 1. Then our update is going to decrease I by 1. So our I is now going to become 0. Now our condition is now checking if 0 is less than 3. Our condition is again true. So now we're going to print the number 0. Then we're again going to go back to our update, which is going to decrease our I by 1. So I will now be equal to 0 minus 1. So it's going to be minus 1. Our condition is now checking if minus 1 is less than 3, which is true. So we're going to print minus 1. As we keep executing, you're going to notice that since our I values keep decreasing, our condition I is less than 3 will always be true. Because of this, you're just going to keep printing smaller and smaller values of I, starting from 1 and going till negative infinity. Basically, we're just going to get an infinite loop that keeps printing smaller and smaller values. When I run this program, you're going to notice that we do get an infinite loop. We're going to get smaller and smaller values of I. Now let's say I do want to print values that keep decreasing. Basically, I do want my update to keep decreasing the value of I. Then how can I change the condition to make sure that we don't get an infinite loop? It's a very simple change. All we're going to do is change this lesser than to a greater than and make this 3 something smaller than I. So maybe something like minus 3. Let's look at the same loop and try to understand why changing this condition will prevent an infinite loop. First, we're going to start by creating an output window. I'm representing that output window using this purple box. Then we're going to create this orange box to just track the value of I. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to initialize I. So we're going to initialize I to 1. After this, you're going to move to the condition. You're checking if the condition is true. Here we're checking if I is greater than minus 3. Basically, we're checking if 1 is greater than minus 3 since initially the value of I is 1. Our condition is obviously true. 1 is greater than minus 3. So since our condition is true, we can move on to the block of code. Our block of code is just printing the value of I. So since the value of I is 1, we're going to see a 1 on our output window. From this block of code, we're going to move on to the update. So instead of writing I is equal to I minus 1, I'm using a decrement operator because it's much shorter and much easier to understand. I minus minus is going to decrease the value of I by 1. So it's going to decrease I to 0. And we're going to move back to the condition and we're going to check if the condition is still true. Now we're checking if 0 is greater than minus 3. This condition is true. 0 is greater than minus 3. So since the condition is true, we're going to move on to the block of code again. We're again printing the value of I is now 0. So you're going to print 0 on your output window. From the println statement, we're going to move back to the update. The update is again decreasing the value of I by 1. So we're going to subtract 1 from 0 and we're going to get I as minus 1. From the update, we're going to go back to the condition and now we're checking if minus 1 is greater than minus 3. Again, our condition is obviously true. Minus 1 is greater than minus 3. Since our condition is true, from this condition, you're going to move on directly to the println statement. Again, the println statement is printing I. I is minus 1, so you're going to see a minus 1 on your output window. You're going to go back to the update. You're going to decrease I by 1. So since I is minus 1 currently, minus 1 is just going to be minus 2. You're going to go back to the condition. The condition is checking if minus 2 is greater than minus 3. Since the condition is true, you're going to move to the println statement. The println statement is just printing the minus 2. Finally, we're going to go back to the update. We're going to decrease I by 1. So since I is minus 2, it's going to become minus 3 next. From the decrement, we're going to go to the condition. Our condition is now checking if minus 3 is greater than minus 3. Our condition is obviously false. Minus 3 is equal to minus 3, not greater than minus 3. Since the condition is false, we're not going to execute this println statement anymore, and we're just going to move on to the rest of the program. Like I explained with other for loops, if you had a println statement after our for loop that prints the value of I, we are going to print the final value of I. If you look at the orange box, I has been decreasing. It starts at 1 and it decreases by 1 every single execution till it gets to minus 3. So when we finally print the value of I, we're going to be printing minus 3. To show that we were right, let me just execute this block of code. When I run this program, we're going to get our answer as 1, 0, minus 1, minus 2. You can understand this by just manually executing the loop or just understanding that since we're decreasing the value of I, After a few executions, this condition will become false and the loop will stop executing. Now, although this is not used as much, this is also a completely correct and a reliable way of controlling the number of executions of a loop. By controlling the condition, the value at which I is starting, and the update, I can control the number of times I want to repeat a block of code. The main difference here is that instead of increasing the value of I, you're decreasing it, and because you're decreasing it, a condition is usually going to check if I is greater than some value instead of checking if I is lesser than some value. Now this was just a brief introduction to for loops. To actually master them, you need to use them a lot in programming. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching and have a great day.